Hi there. Welcome to Cretan Classics. I am Davey Cretan, and I am pleased as punch to have, for the first time on my channel, two guests. First of all, Bicyclelegs from the YouTube channel Bicyclelegs. I wanted to introduce him first because he was, I think, the third person who had me on his YouTube channel. We did Billy Joel the first time,
Yep.
favorite songs from each album. And I've been on his channel a bunch of times, so it's a pleasure to have him here. Welcome, Bicyclelegs.
Thank you for having me.
Thanks for coming on. We've been planning this for quite a while, so it's about time we got to it. Before I reveal what we're doing today, my second guest, you know him from the Contrarians, you know him from Grant's Rock Warehaus, and from Rock Daydream Nation. Ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Todd Evans.
Hey, everybody, and Bicyclelegs.
Yep.
That's true. We've all been on Bicyclelegs
Yep.
chat. And today, the three of us are here. We've talked about this for like a year or so. We're going to rank the albums of British progressive rock band IQ. Now, IQ have been around for a little over 40 years, yet they only have 11 studio records. So this is a band that doesn't put out a record a year tour, a record a year tour. These guys take their time. And because the music industry is as it is, they all have other jobs. They can't really survive on what they make in the band. So they each have jobs. So they get together, they write, they put out a record every 4, maybe 5 years, but it's always a great album. This band have no bad albums, at least to me, in their catalog. Now, I came in at an odd point. I came in the late 80s with this band. So that might make me a contrarian about how I rank the albums here. Todd, when did you come into IQ?
1990, and I had a coworker that had The Wake, and he had Namzamo. So the only thing that I thought existed was one album with Peter Nichols and one album with Paul Manel, and he just didn't have Are You Sitting Comfortably? It wasn't easy to find, and he didn't have Tales from the Lush Attic, also difficult to find back in the day in the States. So.
Definitely. And what about you, Bicyclelegs? When did you come into the
It
IQ
was
world?
bit later for me. It was probably beginning of the 2000s. So I downloaded a couple of their albums, Naughty Naughty, um, back before streaming was a thing and you could do that. I'd heard about them. I'd never heard them. So I got a couple of their albums. I won't say which ones because it might spoil what my ranking's going to be and what have you. But it was like one earlier one, one later one. And yeah, they were interesting band right from the get-go, but it took me a few listens before it really, really clicked for me.
Definitely. This is not easy listening music, it's uneasy listening music. And as they get further, not further away, as they get further into their career, their music gets more dense. And the last two studio records have been double albums. So you're talking about one is an hour and 42 minutes, one is an hour 48. So it is a lot of music to digest and get into. And it's not something you hear the first time and go, I love it. It's great. I know everything about the record. No, you have to have multiple listens with this stuff. So without further ado, we're going to go one at a time through the IQ catalog, naming our top albums. The order will be Todd, Bicyclelegs, and then me. So, Todd, your number 11.
My number 11, this was sort of an upset. I tried to make a point to listen to everything in the last, 4 or 5 days all the way through. And when I listened to this one all the way through, it dropped down 2 notches. But my number 11 is Namzamo. Um, while I feel like it is a step ahead of the albums that come before it as far as polish and as far as, sounding like something that could possibly be a commercial entity, I feel like Paul Manel's performance kind of lets me down, and I feel like there are some really bad hiccups with lyrics. Um, what sets us apart from the creatures still on the ocean bed, our evolution, it's natural. He might as well just said it's natural, man. There are a couple of things like that in otherwise good songs that are just kind of awkward and weird for me. And very interesting thing. I have this. This is the US version of Namzamo on Squawk Records. And the vinyl doesn't have color flow on it. It ends with Common Ground. And that's one of the things that I'm not crazy about is the song Color Flow. But cool thing about this, it's got a promo picture in it of, hey, look, we've got hair too, just like the other bands. And it's also got a press kit in it. I'm not going to do this with every album. This is the only one that I have fun stuff, but has a little
Nice.
press kit there. But yeah, you know, when you're talking about IQ, I don't know how many people, I've said it a couple of times in a couple of different shows, but IQ is my favorite band. So, you know, my 11th favorite album by my favorite band, I still like quite a bit. So that's my number 11, Namzamo.
Bicyclelegs?
All right. Well, I'm probably not going to be a huge surprise here either. With my bottom two and my top three were pretty much set in stone, although there was a little upset in my top three. It was the stuff in the middle that was really difficult for me to rank. But my number 11, and again, like Todd, I still like this album quite a bit. It's going to be Are You Sitting Comfortably from 1989, the second album with Paul Manel. Second album. Funny thing with the two Paul Manel albums are the only ones that were on, or at least distributed by, major labels. Because they're on Squawk Records, but they're distributed by like either Mercury or Vertigo, depending on which territory you're in.
Yeah.
Polygram in the States.
Polygram
So,
Mercury, yeah, in the States.
Yeah. Now, I promised you guys before we started taping that I would produce something that you may not have expected to see. Well, this is it, because this, believe it or not, is an Australian pressing.
Wow.
As far as I know, it's the only IQ record that ever got an Australian pressing.
Wow.
So,
I think they were trying to push them. That label was let me consult my bio. That's the wrong album. That label was created by a guy who had some ties to some other bands. Let's see. The debut of the Squawk Polygram label, a new label headed by Cliff Bernstein and Peter Minch, the management team behind Def Leppard, Metallica, and Dokken. So I think that they were trying to, and this probably explains the hair metal looking pictures from then. I think they knew they were a prog band, but they were trying to market them as something more mainstream. I think they had high hopes.
Absolutely. And I think with these two albums, and this one in particular, I think there's definitely songs on here where they are going for a more mainstream radio friendly sound. And that's fine, but it's not really what I want to hear from IQ. I want to hear the really proggy stuff and that sort of thing. I like Paul Manel as a vocalist. I do feel like he's a little bit of a dollar store Peter Nichols in some ways. Especially 80s Peter Nichols. Like Peter Nichols, I think we'll find as we go through the catalog, really evolves as a vocalist from those early 80s records through to what he sounds like as a vocalist these days. But Paul Manel, yeah, he does a fine job. Again, lyrically, both of those albums, I think, yeah, I like Peter Nichols much better as a lyricist as well.
Yeah, definitely as a lyricist, but as a vocalist at the time, I thought Paul Manel was better. I was like, oh, that's an improvement. And then something else came out later with Peter Nichols on it, and then that was out the window.
Yeah.
No spoilers.
But I mean, the songs that are proggier here, I really like Falling Apart at the Seams is really good. Wernish, I think that's how you say it.
I've never known how to say that because I've never heard anybody say it.
Wrench,
but some of the more radio friendly, as it were, tunes, yeah, don't quite work for me. And the way that the song selection, like the flow of the songs, I don't think works as well as it does on the previous album. The sequencing, that's the word I was looking for. So that's why that one's my number 11. But having, listened to it again in the last few days, it's still an enjoyable record. So, don't get me wrong when I put this at number 11. I'm not saying this is a pile of garbage. It's not. It's a really good record, but the other records are better. That's all.
Okay, I expected to see these records at the bottom, and I think most hardcore, I no pun intended with the new record, most hardcore actually Rotor Bones hardcore is on. But at any rate, most
Recent.
really huge fans of IQ would probably put those records at the bottom. But I have a different one at my number 11. And I have to throw myself under the bus here. And Bicyclelegs knows what I'm talking about because I was complaining recently to him without Martin Orford. And here's his second solo album, The Old Road, which is a great album. Without Martin Orford, I was saying IQ is not IQ. I was wrong. The more I've listened to the two most recent albums, the more I really love and appreciate them. I always, there are people that say Styx without Dennis DeYoung, Yes without John Anderson, Kansas without Steve Walsh, Van Halen without David Lee Roth. That's not the real band. And I was that way with IQ, with Martin Orford. Once he left the band, I lost a bit of interest. I got the records, I played them. I said, okay, it's good, but I miss Martin Orford. But I was wrong. And these records are really good. One of them is at my number 11. The lineup is Peter Nichols on vocals, Michael Holmes, as he now calls himself, on guitar and production, Neil Durant on keyboards, who's a much better keyboard player than I gave him credit for, Tim Esau, am I pronouncing his last name correctly, guys?
That's my best guess.
Esau on bass
Never heard that said
guitar.
either.
And Paul Cook, not to be confused with Paul Cook from the Sex Pistols. Just like two Mick Jones, two Paul Cooks. These wacky British guys. We love them all. All our favorite bands are from there. So at my number 11, unfortunately, it is IQ. And the more I listen to it, the more I like it. I'm going to have to put Resistance because I have the least amount of time with it. And I know that might be blasphemous. Came out in 2019. It's an hour and 48 minutes long. So it's their longest album, double CD, probably a triple or quadruple record. And it's a lot of music to get through. Probably how many? 4 records, guys?
3.
3 records. Okay, I was close. Now, there are great songs on this record that grab me right away. A Missile is really good. Stay Down. Shallow Bay. Michael Holmes' guitar outro work on that song. Stellar guitar playing on the outro of Shallow Bay. And the last song, the epic track Fallout, is really good. And re-listening to the album again, that's the track that hit me. So this album, like another record later in their career that's gone up my list, actually, I changed my ranking. This one could go up eventually. The more I listen to it, the more I like it. But for now, it's my number 11, but it's not a bad record.
I just wanted to add, you talk about your Paul Cooks and your Mick Joneses. There's also your Roger Taylors.
That's
'Cause
right.
You've got the Queen Roger Taylor and the Duran Duran Roger Taylor.
And they seem really
Good one.
close too. They're like, they're drummers in really popular bands with like good-looking guys in them that make super popular stadium music. So I always found that to be really interesting that they're both named Roger Taylor.
Hey, there could be a show in this.
Right.
Okay, Todd, you're number 10.
Okay, well, I wanted to make a quick comment about what you were saying earlier about Martin Orford. The more I learn about this band and how things work and what their workflow is, the more I have realized, and I would have never said this earlier in my lifetime, but the person the person that needs to be there is Michael Holmes. Michael Holmes is the guy. You know how people say Tony Banks is Genesis if it was only one person. Michael Holmes is the guy. He sort of gets the last say. He's the last guy who goes through everything. And if he feels like something needs to be redone, he redoes it. So I remember a really interesting interview with him where he said, people keep asking me if Neil Durant is actually as good as he is, or if that's me playing. And he said, the answer is Neil Durant's actually that good. So I did wonder, though. We'll talk about that more later when we get to one of the albums that apparently Martin wrote all of. But my number 10, and everybody get your block button ready. Uh, my number 10 is Tales from the Lush Attic. Now, The Last Human Gateway is one of the most gorgeous songs ever written. And so I'm more than happy to admit that. But this album was made in like 5 days, and it feels like it's rushed. It feels like you can't, it's not, Paul Cook really isn't Paul Cook yet, and more on that later. It feels that they came out of the gate fully formed, but it just feels so rough to me that by the time I get towards the end of it, I'm ready to be done with it, even though it's got some beautiful songs on it. So that's my number 10, Tales of the Lush Attic. Tales from the Lush Attic.
Yep.
Bicyclelegs, your number 10?
Okay. I think based on what I was talking about with my number 11, my number 10 is going to come as a surprise to precisely no one, and that is Nomzamo. I like this record a little bit better than Are You Sitting Comfortably, simply because I think it's sequenced a little better. Because basically you have sort of, it kind of alternates this record. You get radio-friendly track, then proggy track, then radio-friendly track, then proggy track. And I think that works a little better than the way it is on Are You Sitting Comfortably? Yeah, you get the lovely picture of the boys on the back there, as Todd was showing earlier, and Martin Orford wearing his hat because he doesn't have hair. And as I say, it's probably a matter of very small degrees between these two records as to putting them number 10 or number 11. But as I say, it's the sequencing on this one. And I think the proggy tracks work just a little better on this one. They have more of that sort of IQ flavor from the first two records. So that's why I'm going to put this one at number 10. But yeah, so Nomzamo, my number 10.
Yeah, and an interesting thing about that too is that the sequencing, when you look at the vinyl, the long songs don't look long. So it's like when you're playing the record, it looks like 5 almost equal length songs on each side, which I always thought was interesting, or 5 on one and 4 on the other, however it is.
Yeah.
But yeah, you don't feel like you actually have to notice, hey, that's 8 minutes long. Otherwise, it just kind of goes past you.
Yeah.
My number 10 is the same as Todd's. Are You Sitting Comfortably? From 1989, 45 minutes long, on the Squawk label, as we discussed, distributed in the States through Polygram A&M. Produced by Terry Brown, producer of Rush for many, many years. And this was the album with a lineup change where they got Paul P.L. Manel on vocals. This, at the time, had the best drum sound, which I thought was down to Terry Brown. I always thought on the first 3 albums that Paul Cook's drum sound was not very good. And on this album, it sounded a little better, and I thought that was down to Mr. Terry Brown. I like the album opener, War Heroes. It really builds, and then it explodes in that great IQ manner. Drive On, I wrote Pure Pop Rock Confection, with great keyboards by Widge, which is Martin Orford's nickname, and a nice guitar solo by Mike Holmes. Of course, Todd mentioned Nostalgia, Falling Apart at the Seams, or was it Bicyclelegs? One of you guys mentioned it. And when he says, Here It Comes Again, just love that part. And I think they really bring it on that song. The lyrics might be a little cheesy here and there. Some of that spoken words you hear in the background, you don't need that. Sold on You is pure pop for now people, I wrote down, but it's irresistible. It's very catchy, and it has another good Mike Holmes guitar solo. Through My Fingers is a mid-tempo moody number, which they do really well. Some nice fretless bass by Tim on that song. And throughout their career, great fretless bass on the IQ catalog between Tim and John Jowett later on. Wrench, I put prog with a capital P, and Nothing at All ends the album in a proggy style, very melodic with the mix of the guitars and the keyboards. So I like this record, and it was the second one I heard back in the day. I got Nomzamo first, this I got second, probably in 1989, 1990 when it came out, since I was working at the record store. I really like this album, but it's not as good as the others, so it is my number 10. Todd?
Okay. So my number 9 is big surprise. Are you sitting comfortably? I feel like this album moved up. It moved up in front of my 11 and 10. I was thinking about putting it last, but I think it works a little better as an album. It feels more like a marketable product. Not that, a lot of people would think of that as a put down, but it it feels complete. It feels like it flows like a record like this should. An interesting thing about this album and Nanzamo, one of the things that's really jarring when you're used to listening to the first two and then you listen to the Paul Manel records is background vocals, which is Martin Orford. And it's just like background vocals. What is that? IQ doesn't have background vocals, but on these two records they do. I think that Nostalgia and Falling Apart at the Seams is really exceptional, and it in the during my last listen, I figured out that I like it a little more. I thought Sold on You, I always thought was not very good at all until the last couple of weeks when I was listening to this album. I kind of thought, that little keyboard melody in there is really, really good. And it's the kind of thing that only a prog band would really come up with. Uh, Warrench is great. I love it. I like the sound effects and the knocking and the spoken word. It doesn't bother me. I think it's kind of super trampy, so I sort of like it. So yeah, that's and Terry Brown. I know there are other Terry Brown albums that are not Rush besides this one, but this is the only one I've ever heard that isn't Rush. So so there you go, for whatever that's worth. Can any of you guys think of any? I can't think of any off the top of my head.
No, well, that's probably I mean, I heard this as a Terry Brown record before I heard
Before
pretty
you
much
heard
any
Rush.
Rush
That's
album
right.
that he did, because the only Rush album I'd heard was the debut by that stage, and Terry Brown didn't produce
Didn't
that,
do
did
it,
he?
right. I don't think
No.
so.
I've heard all the Tiles records, and he produced all the Tiles records. The band
Oh, that's
again,
right.
Okay.
they sound a lot like Rush.
Okay.
The guitar player Chris Herron just put out a solo record I want to check out.
Well, there you go.
Be
Cool.
good.
All right. Well, my number 9 is going to be similar to um Davies. Was it number 10 or 11? But yeah, it's Resistance from 2019. I think of all the more modern IQ albums, this one just doesn't quite hit for me the way the other ones do. I feel like, and I don't want to sort of get a lot of hate mail for this, but I feel like there are a few of these songs are a little bit by the numbers, sort of modern IQ. They hit all the right buttons and all that, but they don't quite have, I don't know, they're just not grabbing me the way that some of the stuff on a lot of the 21st century IQ albums do. Having said that, I absolutely agree with Davey. Fallout is marvelous. Absolutely. Why it's on side 6 of a six-sided record, it's like, I mean, yeah, leave your best to last, but I would have liked it a little earlier. I think it would have helped a little more. The other big, big epic on this album is The Great Spirit Way, and it's one of my least favorite IQ epics. Um, Again, I don't hate it. I don't dislike it. I just feel like it doesn't have that special sauce, if you know what I mean, that a lot of the other IQ epics have. We're going to talk about a couple of IQ epics coming up that just absolutely have that beautiful special sauce that IQ epics, a lot of them have. But yeah, For Another Lifetime's another really good track. But yeah, the first couple of sides, I feel like they're good, but they feel a little bit going through the motions for me. So that's why this one ranks at number 9 for me, is Resistance.
Okay, that's fair. There's some similarities going on here. My number 9 was already mentioned by Mr. Todd. And at number 9, their debut album from 1983, Tales from the Lush Attic. just about 46 minutes long. It was on a record label called the Major Record Company, which was probably super, super indie in England, but that was in at the time with all the new wave of British heavy metal bands. A lot of them were on indie labels, but this was neo-prog, as they called it back then, the new wave of prog. Marillion, Palace, Pendragon, IQ, produced by IQ, and Todd said it was recorded quickly, so it's poor production quality on here, and that it's a little fatiguing to my ear, and it reminds me of Billy Joel's debut album, Cold Spring Harbor, where it was recorded a little too fast. Everything seems sped up. Like they should,
It's either sped up or they're rushing.
like
That's
this
the
epic,
impression
slow
I
the
get.
tempo down.
Yeah.
It's too fast. And it's really the epics that hit me from this album. The Last Human Gateway, I love. Awake and Nervous is really good. It has a great synth line from Martin Orford. And of course, The Enemy Smacks, which is excellent on the live album, Forever Live. Double CD here, made in Great Britain. The Enemy Smacks is phenomenal on here, but I'm getting away from the album itself. It's good on the record, but it sounds a little fast. For a debut album, it's good, but it's the quality of it. The bonus track just changing hands, even though it says it's 10 minutes long on the CD. It's only 5 minutes because there's some of that blank space. And then there's this cool, weird sounding Indian instrumental raga song for the last minute of it. This was engineered and mixed by Mel Simpson. So I'm guessing from the sound of it, it's Homer's brother. No! Because the sound quality on here is what makes this my number 9.
Are we
It's a
sure
good
it's not
record.
Homer?
Maybe Homer helped him. Maybe it's Homer under a pseudonym of Mel Simpson. So this is my number 9, but it's still a really good record. It's proggy, and who was doing records like this with a 19-minute song in 1983? Only Marillion with their B-side Grendel, which was 18 minutes, and this is a minute longer. So my
Right.
number 9, Tales from the Lush Attic.
Okay. All right. All right. So my number 8, hopefully there won't be any more hitting the block button, but maybe. My number 8 is The Wake. I think that this is a beautiful album. The first time I ever heard Headlong, I fell head over ears in love with it and just thought it was the greatest thing ever. Um, I love Widow's Peak. I love The Wake. I love Outer Limits. It's a fantastic album. It suffers a little bit from Peter Nichols being a pretty undisciplined vocalist. I have a really good friend, Paul, if you're watching. Hi, Paul. He loves IQ, but he's like, I have trouble getting through this because of the vocals.
Wow.
And it's one of those things where when somebody tells you that, it's like, it didn't bother me before, but it bothers me now, so yeah, I feel like it could have been a little bit more polished, but there's some things that I really like about it. Again, the drum sound is not, they kind of hit a groove and kind of stay, they kind of hit a high level and kind of stay there throughout the rest of their career. They're not there yet, but there's something about it that is kind of endearing. I kind of like it. I think it might be because this was the first IQ album I ever heard, and I just I'm sentimental about it. But fantastic, just out of this world compositions. Um, they're not quite there yet with the recording quality and the engineering, but I still love this album. And pretty much right here is where you get to where all the IQ albums are like this, and they just sort of go like this. I mean, it's eighth because something has to be eighth. And they're looking, it's pre-hair metal. They're looking a little
It
post-punk new
looked like
wave.
the Alarm. That's what they
They
remind
do.
me of, the Alarm. Those
Yep.
puffy hairstyles.
Yeah,
Yeah.
but I still love it. Don't be mad at me. I love The Wake. It's just I like the other stuff more.
Okay,
Yeah.
that's fair.
No, fair enough. Tim Esau on the back there with the like epic mullet.
Oh yeah.
Look at that mullet right there. Yeah. My number 8 is going to be one that's already been mentioned here as well, and that is Tales from the Lush Attic. This is the 2013 remix. I'm still trying to source an original pressing of this. I think you'll find, Davey, like the major record label. Oh, they're actually not that expensive, but the major record label was basically just their own label that they made up.
Okay.
When it got re-released like later in the year, and I think it's like the label that they made up for it then is something called like the original One Shoe record label or something like that. It's like they're just coming up with these balmy names for the but it's funny. IQ are arguably the second most successful neo-prog band from the 80s after only Marillion. And yet, of their 11 albums, only 2 of them are on major labels. So,
And only one made the charts in England.
yeah, exactly. So, this is still, I enjoy this album. I agree with you about the production on it. It's not good because they're probably recording it in this like, garden shed or something like that. And my theory as to why it sounds a little fast is probably they were trying to make sure that all of these songs could fit on one record. So they felt like they had to play them a little quicker than they would have otherwise. But yeah, The Last Human Gateway is wonderful. And The Enemy Smacks is great. The stuff in between, it's fine, but Awake and Nervous is good. But I mean the other two, even you can tell they've got jokey titles. Like one's called Through the Corridors in parentheses, Oh Shit Me. And then the other one is My Baby Treats Me Right because I'm a hard loving man all night long.
This
And
album
that's,
gets knocked down points just because of that.
yeah.
And
And I
it's
mean that title
piano
is
solo.
I was going to say that title is almost as long as the piece is because it's only about a minute long. So, but I mean, The Last Human Gateway and The Enemy Smacks alone make this worth having. But the sound quality is what drags it down for me. And as sort of Todd was alluding to with The Wake too, Peter Nichols' vocals definitely do have a bit of it, like they're definitely unrefined at this stage. And so they can get a little grating at times. I understand what your friend Paul was saying. Once you get told that, it's one of those I can't unhear that sort of things, isn't it? But yeah, that's my number 8. It's still a really good record. I'm not a fan of bands who re-record like old records and that sort of thing. But if there was an album that could possibly benefit from that, this is one of them.
Yeah, that Blu-ray from 4 or 5 years ago that has the live performance of it in 2020 or 2021, whenever it was, that's really something. It really makes a big difference.
Yeah.
And I do not own that. I'm going to have to look into that.
I can't remember the name of it.
Okay, my number 8, and here's where a lot of the hate mail will come in. Not that anyone does hate mail anymore, more hate.
Yeah, that's not really a thing. I don't know why I said that.
They'll find me on social media and they'll get me. They'll say, "You're a knucklehead." Another IQ reference. Oh my God. And it's from the very album I'm going to speak about. And I know fans love this record. And this was lower on my list. And listening to it recently, this has come up. And it's their record from 2014, another double album at 1 hour and 42 minutes on the Giant Electric P label, which is their own label since 1993. Produced by Mr. Michael Holmes. And it is The Road of Bones is my number 8 here. The more I hear it, the more I like it. When I first heard it, it just didn't hit me. And I said, there's no catchiness. Where's Martin Orford's catchy keyboards? But this is a concept record about a serial killer. And that's really all I'll say about the record now. So it's a very dark record, the lyrics, the sound of it. But the more I hear it, the more I really enjoy it. From the outside in has this churning, grinding, rocking rhythm. For an opening track, it's really good. The Road of Bones, the title track, is a moody piece Really like that one. Without Walls, the 19-minute epic on here is great. It starts out slow. There's a lot of texture and emotion. And Neil Durant, I will change my opinion on him. He has some really nice keyboard work throughout this song. He's got those eerie Scooby-Doo sounds, keyboard sounds, I call them. These eerie sounds, but they fit with the concept being about a serial killer. There's a bit of a cacophonous part in the middle, and they do it on purpose. And when my producer Tia heard me listening to it earlier, she said that sounds a little like Carnival #9. And to me, it sounds like the noisy section in Yes's The Gates of Delirium. But IQ's doing it in their own way. And then at 14:44 into the 19-minute track, there's just this triumphant lift, this key change, and it's this hero's theme. And it's amazing. And then Michael Holmes has some nice soloing to the end of the song. So Without Walls is a definite highlight on this album. Ocean is a good mid-paced ballad. Knucklehead has some great textures and guitar tones with some nice acoustic guitars, which you don't hear that often on IQ records, but you hear it on here. The instrumental, which is track number 7, 1312 Overture, is really good. And in the past, they've done some instrumentals as the opening, like on a record we'll be discussing later that no one's mentioned yet. But here it's deep in the album, but it's a good song. Constellations is all over the map, no pun intended. It's a really nice song. And then 10 Million Demons brings back that Scooby-Doo, that eerie woo keyboard sound. It's got great rhythm, and I think it's an important part of the story. The concept overall has a really catchy chorus. So the more I hear it, the more I like The Road of Bones, and a lot of people would place it higher, and eventually it might be higher on my list. But for now, it's my number 8, and I'm sorry for that.
We'll talk some more about that album later. Much later for me. So my number 7 is an album that I absolutely adore. It's The Seventh House. And this album is fun. It's got some things that are very quintessentially proggy on it. It's got some things that are atmospheric and not really so proggy at all. But the title track, The Seventh House, has kind of something that I think is an IQ, kind of an IQ trademark. But the difficult thing about that is it's hard to describe. It has the Seventh House during the last 2 minutes. It has a very beautiful but unexpected chord progression. And you kind of first hear that, earlier in their career, like on the Wake during Headlong. But there's something about it. It's hard to describe, but when you get one of those passages from IQ, you kind of go, oh, that is a chord progression that, number one, I would never have expected, and number two, I don't think I've ever heard anybody do that. But not knowing exactly what it is, it's difficult for me to put into words.
It
But I
gets
think
you in the
Seventh
field.
House,
It gives you a feeling.
it does, yeah, yeah, and in a way that you just kind of go, wow, kind of like the best example by something better known that I can think of as Broadway Melody of 1974. When you hear that, you think, oh, that's Tony Banks, and only Tony Banks could have written that. So that's kind of what I'm talking about, where you go, oh, that melody did not go where I expected to go to. It went to this totally new place that I was not even expecting. Um, Guiding Light's fantastic. I love this record. Now, this record supposedly was written entirely by Martin Orford, and then it was handed in to the rest of the band. And apparently, Michael Holmes made a lot of embellishments and changes to it. But when Martin Orford left IQ, I think that he wanted everybody to know that he wrote all of these songs. But I think Michael Holmes probably had just as much to do with it. But they all originated from Martin Orford's brain. So at least that's what I've heard. But I think The Seventh House is a fantastic record and a beautiful cover. Oh my goodness, isn't that lovely? So yeah, that's my number 7, The Seventh House. Hey, look how that worked out.
Yeah. Just quickly want to say, I don't think there's a single IQ album that I don't like the cover of. And I
Same
don't know
here.
that I don't know that, I don't know if I can say that about pretty much any other band that I
Yeah.
really, really like. So, most bands, even the ones I really like, have album covers that, yeah, just don't do it for me. But
Or every
I
once in a
like
while
all
they
of
have
them.
a bad one, but IQ's never had a bad one. I
Yeah,
agree.
Well, that's because Peter Nichols does a lot of the artwork and the art
Yeah.
direction on the bulk of the covers.
Yeah.
yeah. Well, my number seven is going to be the only one that I don't have on vinyl. Their album from 1993, Return of Peter Nichols, and that is Ever. And I like this record quite a bit, but I think it has a foot in the 80s IQ and a foot in the IQ to come, if you understand what I'm talking about. And they would just expand on this sound and get sort of better and better from here. And you can tell they've given up that 80s, late 80s hair metal look by this stage, and much more sort of natural, geeky kind of look for them. But the Darkest Hour is a great opener. Really, really love it. Um, Out of Nowhere, I've always really liked. Leap of Faith and Came Down are the other tracks that I really like on this record. Um, I've got to, if anybody has a copy of this album on vinyl that they're willing to part with for a not stupid price, let me know in the comments because I'd love to hear from you because it's the only one I'm missing and they haven't re-released it yet. I'm sure they will eventually because that's the beautiful thing with IQ at the moment. They are currently reissuing every album on vinyl. So if you've never bought them, you know, get on that now because they are limited edition too. So, but yeah, this Ever is really, as I say, it's got a foot in that 80s, in that sort of Tales from the Lush Attic and the Wake sound, and then it's got a foot in what would come with Subterranea and Seventh House and so on and so on. So it's a transitional record in that respect, which is maybe why I rank it a little lower than some of the other albums. But I really like this album a lot. It's a really great return for Peter Nichols, and they would just go on to bigger and better things from there.
Cool. More on that later. My number seven, 62-minute album, came out in 2009. And this is an outlier in their catalog because it only has two original members, Peter Nichols on vocals, Mike Holmes on guitar. It's the only album to feature on keyboards Mark Westworth, and he does a great job here. This is the first album without Martin Alford. I've always really loved this album. John Jowett on bass, backing vocals, bass pedals, fretless bass. The guy's a monster. And the one time I saw IQ, really fast to sidetrack, I saw them at the first Near Fest, 1999 in Pennsylvania. And John Jowett, I met him outside. Nicest guy, friendly, talking to everyone, signing autographs, just no ego whatsoever. So a really cool guy. And he's played with so many great prog bands. Love him. And on drums on this record, the only album he appears on, he's now a huge YouTuber. I think he definitely just made a video saying he's leaving the music business because he's making a living as a YouTuber. Andy Edwards on drums, ladies and gentlemen, on this record. And he's a monster player too. This rhythm section just gelled. And they went on to form a lot of bands, and they played in Frost, they played in Neo, Quill, and Rain. So they just hit it off, John Jowett, Andy Edwards, and they went on to play together a lot of times. But for an album with two original members, this album is way more cohesive and better than anyone thinks it is. I love this record. I put down Westworth's keyboards as stellar throughout the record, and I wish he'd stuck around. Although Neil Durant is growing on me, everyone. Where was I in my notes? I think there are no Duff tracks on this album. Highlights for me: Frequency. What a song! That galloping rhythm, those cool keyboards, Stronger Than Friction, great 10-minute track. One Fatal Mistake, which is almost part of Stronger Than Friction. The melodies in there are beautiful. And the last track, like Todd was saying, Closer. It has that great key change, that lift. I always called it the lift. And I just realized that as I was doing my notes over the last few days, it's this great key change where it just jumps up. It might go from a minor to a major. I'm not sure. I'm just a singer in a rock and roll band, as John Lodge once said in the Moody Blues. I'm not really a musician, so I don't have the knowledge. But I think it's this great key change where it just lifts the whole song. And that ending of Closer is phenomenal. At 3:46, yeah, in the song Closer, it just starts soaring all the way to the end. So for an album without Martin Orford, I've always loved this record. And it's very immediate. It's great. It rocks. It has an energy to it. It's my number 9. I love Frequency. But unfortunately, it's at number 9, but it's not a bad record. It's a great record.
Okay. I agree with all of that. And where are we? We're at number 6, I think.
Number
Yeah.
6, yeah.
Oh, I just said
That
the
was your number
yeah, that's
7
my
just then.
yeah, it's my number 7.
Oh, I didn't even
Sorry.
notice that you said 6.
Oh, it's the number 7. Frequency at 7. Sorry.
No worries. Okay, so my number 6 is Ever. I guess I should show this first because that's what people are used to seeing. And this is the vinyl copy, and I just lucked out by getting this. I couldn't afford it when I bought it. It was very expensive. It's 45 RPM, and I just said, "Oh, what the hell?" and I bought it. And so now I'm really glad I have it. But Ever is one of the things that I've been saving to say, because we've been talking about the sound of the recordings from some of the earlier albums. This is when Paul Cook to me becomes Cookie. This is where he becomes himself. And he has that super kind of wet snare sound. And it's just such a great sound. And he gets it here, and it stays with him. He still sounds that way. And I think The Darkest Hour is possibly the best opening track of any album of any era by anyone. It still blows me away. I was so excited about it when this came out that I made cassettes for all of my friends and just handed them out. I was like, you've got to hear this album. I absolutely love it. I'm not going to talk about it in too much detail. I love the syncopated time signature of Out of Nowhere, the really quirky super prog kind of rhythmic thing that's happening there. But one of the things that I absolutely adore about this album is the closer came down. And the reason why I love it so much is because it's so simple. It is absolutely probably one of the simplest songs they ever did, and it's so effective. And another thing that I love about it is I used to say this when I was much younger, and I've learned that it's not necessarily the best opinion to have, but this sort of feeds into that, in that for most of my life I felt like there was only one way to hit a snare drum, and that's hard. And so this is a pretty quiet, kind of a not quiet, but it's kind of a mellow song, but he is hitting the ever-loving crap out of that snare drum throughout the entire song. And I absolutely love that because I love the juxtaposition of it being kind of a gentle song, but having this super aggressive whack on the snare drum. I absolutely love that. And I've always loved this record, and it is my number 6.
All right. It's funny, my number 7, Todd, was your number 6. Your number 7 is my number 6, The Seventh House. This came after Subterranea, and Subterranea is an album that we're all going to talk about later. It's considered to be one of the absolute highlights of IQ's career. This was seen as a bit of a letdown. after Subterranea, critically and that sort of thing. And in the fan base, I think a lot of people saw this album as a bit of a letdown. And that's really, really unfair because this is a great album. It's not Subterranea. And it would have been tempting for them to make Subterranea Part 2 after the critical acclaim that that album got. They didn't. They made this record instead. And this is one of the most varied albums in their career as far as different styles of music. And I really, really like that about it. It's got a couple of great sort of long tracks. The title track, The Seventh House, I think really underrated. Guiding Light is really, really good too. But 0 Hour, The Wrong Side of Weird. Um, there's not a bad track on this album. If you've not given this one enough time as an IQ fan because of sort of the supposed letdown after Subterranea, go back and revisit this album. You will not be disappointed. It's a
Yeah.
wonderful, wonderful album.
And it kind of sets the blueprint for the next few albums to where there are 5 or 6 tracks about that length. And I love that. I think sometimes albums are too long, and we'll talk about that more later.
Mm,
But one of the things too that I forgot to say about the title track of the Seventh House that I wanted to mention is that that prog uh, tool that a lot of prog bands used, where they give you this section in the middle that's got a lot of tension, they make you sit through it to get the big payoff at the end. The seventh one makes you sit through a really long buildup of tension before it lets you have that melody. And I
yeah,
think that's super cool. Yeah, it's a way better album than most people say.
absolutely agree.
So do I, and I haven't even spoken about it yet. I did forget to show that I do have The Road of Bones on CD. I forgot to show it when I mentioned it. My number 6, you gentlemen already mentioned. This is where I came into the band, so this album holds a special place in my heart. And I know it's at the bottom of a lot of people's list, but Noam Zamo from April 1987 is my number 6. 48 minutes on Squawk through Polygram. It's their major label debut at the time, produced by a gentleman named Ken Thomas. And they actually released 2 singles from this album. The very pop sounding Passing Strangers was the first single, and then Promises was the second single. This was the first album with Paul P.L. Manel on vocals. It's got Mike Holmes, Martin Orford, Timmy Sow, and Paul Cook on the record. So I think I heard this in 1988, 1989 when I first started at Titus Oaks. And someone said, hey, you'll probably like this. Sounds like Genesis. And to me, it sounded a little like 80s Genesis, especially No Love Lost. The first song, I love the vocals on it, love the keyboard work by Martin Orford, and that's what grabbed me. Promises, as the years go by, really catchy song with some nice keyboards and vocals, and it has a great outro guitar solo by Mike Holmes. Noam Zamo, the title track, is a Zulu name that means she who strives or she who endures. And it's about the struggles of an area in Africa. It's an epic song. It's got some really cool rhythms in it. Passing Strangers is a really good pop song. Wasn't a hit, unfortunately, but it has that IQ twist on it, where although it's a pop song, it's got great musicianship. Human Nature is the 9-minute proggy song on the record. Common Ground to me is the centerpiece on this record, easily my favorite track. Fretless Bass on it by Tim is amazing, and it just builds and builds and builds, and then it has that explosion. And Mike Holmes' guitar playing, phenomenal. One of my favorite Mike Holmes solos. And it's a stellar song. It's a really good way to end the proper record. CD bonus track, the piano vocal version of No Love Lost is wonderful, beautiful, and very haunting. And it's a nice take that there are 2 versions of the song, the Genesis-y keyboard rocky proggy version, and then the piano vocal version. So coming in at number 6, because it's the first one I ever heard way back in the day, about 35 years ago or so, Noam Zamo, my number 6.
You know, I know I picked Namzamo as my number 11, but something I forgot to say about it is the title track of that album is the first moment that I learned that this was going to be an interesting band that was going to grow and change, because it really is quite a departure from what's on Tales of the from the Lush Attic. And so that was the moment where I was just like, well, they're going to be a really interesting band. Even though I picked it as number 11, I think that I still has some real good moments on it. So we're down to number 5. My number 5 is Frequency. Um, I think Frequency is the title track is is one of their best songs. Again, it's just a chord progression that only they could come up with. And that part at the end where it gets real quiet and there's that metal riff that goes that is the coolest thing ever. That is, when I heard that for the first time, I was like, what a weird thing to put there. You know what I mean? And I just think it's great. The song Life Support Stronger Than Fiction, One Fatal Mistake, all great. Uh, the Province is very, very, very good with an excellent guitar solo. And the closer, it could almost not even be there. I mean, with it ending, if it ended with the Province, I'd be happy. But Closer is just beautiful from beginning to end. I just absolutely adore it. And it was a little controversial when this album came out. Martin Orford, who was actually at the time still running Giant Electric P, got real angry because when he heard it, he was certain that they used all of his stuff because he demoed some of it out. And so he wrote some of it before he decided to depart the band. And Mike Holmes had to step in and say, no, we re-recorded all your parts. And Martin Orford was like, some of those things you guys don't know, some of those sounds you guys don't know how to make. And Mike Holmes insisted that he and Mark Westworth, redid the keyboards. So I always thought that was kind of an interesting story. I don't think that Orford kind of kept going on that for a very long time, but I thought it was cool trivia. But that's my number 5, Frequency,
Before we
and very
continue,
good album.
exactly. Before we continue, does anyone know the real reason that Orford left the band?
Orford, one of the one thing that I do remember very vividly was he was really upset about what was going on with the music industry. And this is before streaming. This was
Right.
just when it was, like buying files on iTunes and file sharing. He was very upset about it. And he was just like, I just don't want to do this anymore. I just think that the music business is just going to shit. And I just I'm unhappy and I don't want to keep doing it. And so
Yeah.
he was real very, very emotional about it. He was just like, I can't do it anymore. I think he wrote something like an essay or
Yeah,
something
I
like that.
remember reading that
Yeah,
at the time.
yeah.
Yeah.
And so that's the one thing that I remember. There could have been more, but that's the one thing that I remember was that he was just not going to do it anymore.
I think there's more than meets the eye here. And yes, I
I do
say that
too.
on purpose because he left IQ. He said he's leaving the music biz. He just made the second solo album a couple of years before that,
Hmm.
2008, I think this is from. And he said he's leaving the business, yet he continued with
With
Jadis.
Jadis, right?
So I think there is some friction between the guys in the band, between Orford and Holmes or whomever, maybe Nichols, because he never went back to IQ, but he continues to play with Jadis, although they don't release albums all too often, maybe about as often as IQ does.
And he continued to work with them on the business side. So
So there's definitely something there that's never come out, but I miss him in the band. He's a great player. I wish he'd release another solo record because I think he's a
I
good
Yeah.
I
songwriter,
met
good
him at the
singer.
sh yeah, I wish he would do it too. I met him on the day that I got this shirt at Nearfest in 2005, and we had a nice conversation.
Cool.
And very nice guy.
One of my
I
favorite
said
keyboard
something to him
players.
about John Wetton because it was before Asia had started touring in a big way. And I said, next time you talk, I knew they were friends. And I said, the next time you talk to John Wetton, tell him that we would love to see him here in the States. And his eyes lit up and he got all animated and he was so excited that somebody mentioned John. And he went through this long conversation about how he and John Wetton had been friends for a really long time. Just a super nice guy.
Excellent. Huge fan here. Big fan boy. Okay, Bicyclelegs, your number 5?
All right, my number five is going to be their album from 2014, The Road of Bones. I mean, we're into the top five now, so we are into the cream of the crop.
Right.
You know, the only reason that this one is not higher in my list, and it's something I forgot to mention when I was talking about frequency, is that frequency and Road of Bones are very, very long. They're nearly 2 hours long each. And to me, even when I'm really enjoying an album, I'm a kind of guy, I'm old school. When I put an album on, I need to listen to it from beginning to end. I'm not a playlist guy. I'm just going to listen to side one kind of guy. And when an album's nearly 2 hours long, it gets fatiguing, even if it's really good music. And this is definitely, to me, a much better album than Frequency. Your mileage may vary, but it's a bit too long for me. I would have liked, this is a triple album on vinyl. I think a double album on vinyl would have been heaps, would have been plenty. Um, but I mean, there is some brilliant stuff on here. The Road of Bones, the title track, is probably a top 10 IQ song for me. The track that a lot of people don't talk about because it's like a short track on this album is 1312 Overture. I really like that track. There's just something different about it, which I really, really enjoy. 10 Million Demons. I mean, it's getting towards the end of the album where I'm getting a little fatigued, but that one does sort of bring me back in and think, yes, yes, I'm getting back into the album. You know, it's sort of second to last song. Ocean and Until the End are great too. Without Walls is the sort of the big epic on the album. But overall, I mean, this could be a top three IQ album, just if it was a little bit shorter. That's really my big beef with this album. But I love what's on it. And when I don't get over fatigued from it, I enjoy every minute of it.
As somebody who's an advocate of albums being shorter rather than longer, I have a way of thinking about those last two IQ albums, and I'm going to wait till I get to them to explain it. But I have a way around that.
Fair enough.
More on that later.
Yep.
Okay, my number five was already mentioned by you two gentlemen from the year 2000, produced by Mike Holmes, the Giant Electric P label. Coming in at 57 minutes long, The Seventh House is my number five. And this is to me, like the classic lineup of Nichols, Holmes, Orford, Jowett, and Cook on here. And I'm really only going to talk about the two epics on this album. They make the record for me. The other songs are very good. But that first song, when it comes crashing in, The Wrong Side of Weird, 12 and a half minutes, it starts off with those great Martin Orford synths. It's like you're floating in heaven on a bed of synths. And I just love the intro of the song. And then at 50 seconds, the whole band comes crashing in. And to me, the melody is a little reminiscent of Led Zeppelin's The Song Remains the Same. Ban-na-na, bam, bam, ban-na-na, bam, bam, ban-na-na. But it's catchy and it's great. The whole thing works, even though it has that slight Zeppelin vibe. And I put down Cookie has some nice off-kilter drum beats here, good cymbal splashes, and China work in general. And what a way to start a record. And then the title track, The Seventh House, 14 and a half minutes long. And whenever Nichols sings that part, My Life is Out of Condition, that melody is just phenomenal. I get goosebumps, I get shivers. I love that song. I wrote down the lyrics, but to save time, I'm not going to read them. But the song is basically about a guy who was in a war and everyone in his platoon, all his friends died, and he's the only survivor. And it's sort of about his survivor's guilt. And he goes back to the place where the battle was, and he's the only one left. And it's a tribute to his fallen comrades. I'm not going to read the lyrics, even though I wrote out the last four paragraphs of them because it's a very long show already. It's a prog show. It's like an epic IQ song that's 24 minutes long, but we'll get to that soon enough. So my number five is The Seventh House. just on the two long songs, which are half the record, what, 14 to 26 minutes, takes up half the record, it is worth seeking out The Seventh House.
Okay. My number 4 is, may come as to a surprise to some people, is Subterranea. Um, and and I'm going to say something. I'll wait before I present this because it'll probably get a laugh, and then I'll have to explain later what I meant by that. But this album, I lived in California when this album came out, and it was not released in the States. And Southern California has great record stores, as you can probably imagine. And I used to pick up this record. This CD was $45. And I used to pick it up and put it down and pick it up and put it down. And then finally, like the fifth time I picked it up, I decided, oh, the hell with it. I'm going to have to buy it. But fantastic record. It takes that whole thing I was talking about with the drum sound and the sound of the ensemble really fully gelling. This is the album that really takes that just up another notch to where the sound of modern IQ is really perfected. It's got a lot of really cool things. It's the first IQ album that has elements of EDM, of electronica, of like sequenced synth. So they're sort of playing around with some genre bending there, which I think is really cool. Um, it has a really cool thing, and it's not the first time that they do this. There's another song earlier, and when I was listening to the catalog, it's one of the Paul Manel's albums where there's a song that does this particular thing. But the song Tunnel Vision has a gradual change in an instrumental section from minor to major key, and it's sort of every time they go through the melody, one note changes and it becomes a little bit more major key until at the very end it becomes full major key. And it's at the end of the song Tunnel Vision, and it's just absolutely gorgeous. And when I heard it, I just thought that's the kind of stuff I love. And it's got two really great ballads, Capricorn and Unsolid Ground. Unsolid Ground is a perfect example of that whole EDM thing where they're trying to kind of take a real modern sound and kind of incorporate it into what they do. And the narrow margin is just spectacular. It's got that one part, and I absolutely love this. It's got that part where it goes dun 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 dun, and it's like you can't learn it. It's very, very hard to learn. And I mean, as far as, some kind of, time signature thing to where each note surprises you and you really have to work to try to figure out and learn when the band, plays those unison notes where they're at. But right in my veins. I love that. Give me something that I might not ever figure out. And IQ does that kind of stuff for me. And the Narrow Margin is a perfect example of it. Absolutely beautiful, super great album. It's not higher on my list, and y'all are going to chuckle for the reason it's too long. It takes too long to get through. And I will explain why the last two albums don't do that for me when I get to them. But again, we're at the level to where these are all 9 to 10 star records, all of them.
Yeah.
So Subterranea had to go somewhere, and for me it was number 4.
Fair enough. My number 4 is Frequency from 2009. I love this record. I'm going to make a big call here. I think this is the most dramatic sounding IQ record. And that's a big thing to say because IQ records, generally speaking, are pretty darn dramatic sounding.
Yeah.
But I feel like this one is the most dramatic. And yeah, I mean it's a one-off lineup, as Davey was talking about earlier. You've got a keyboard player and a drummer who don't play on any other IQ album. But it still works. I think it's a great record. The title track is brilliant. Life Support, Stronger Than Friction is one of my favorite songs on the album, as is Riker Skies. I think that's a great, great song. and Already Gone and The Province side, again, it's a double album too on vinyl. It's not a triple, so that kind of puts it into my good books a little. But beginning to end, again, if it wasn't for the fact there's three albums I like just a smidge better, this could be right up the top, and that's saying something, considering, as I say, this is a one-off lineup that would never make any other IQ records, but it still works. I feel like I agree with I can't remember whether it was Todd or I think it was Todd saying that Mike Holmes is like the key ingredient as far as IQ goes. And I think he's the guy who really holds this record together as a producer, as a guitar player. We haven't talked too much about the fact that Mike Holmes is one of these guitar players who has a unique tone. And, he's a guy you can hear play 2 bars of music and you go, that's Michael Holmes, you know? And I love guitar players like that, you know? People like Robert Fripp or The Edge from U2 or Steve Hackett, players like that Dave Gilmour from Pink Floyd, you recognize them instantly just by their guitar tone. And Mike Holmes is one of those guitar players, and I love him to death for that. And yeah. So that's my number 4, Frequency from 2009.
Yeah, one of the cool things about Mike Holmes is that in his solos, he has a couple of tricks that he does very distinctively, and he holds them until like the perfect moment until he gives them to you. And when I talk about my number 3, I'll talk about one of those moments. But yeah, he's very, very methodical about his solos.
He's a great player, no doubt. My number 4 comes from the year 2004, produced again by the great Mike Holmes on Giant Electric P, their own label. 52 minutes long. Dark Matter is my number 4. It's an album with 5 cuts, just 5 songs only. I guess maybe is a single record or a double record, guys?
Single.
Yeah, single album.
Single record. Okay. So side 1 has all the shorter songs, and side 2 has the epic. Sacred Sound, the first track on side 1, monstrous opening track, just like their 3 previous albums I wrote down. The band is firing on all cylinders here. Track 3, You Never Will. It has a great churning bass line from John Jowett. Boom, 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 boom. Excellent bass line. And then I have to mention the 24.5-minute title track. Their longest song, I think. I'm pretty sure it's their longest song in the catalog, right?
I think so.
24.5 minutes long. It has shades and echoes of Supper's Ready and Grendel in it, I put. It hits every prog touchstone to spectacular effect. And that lift again, that key change, 21 minutes and 10 seconds into it. I wrote down, it's friggin' awesome. And it's what I call the uplifting heroes theme again. And it ends the epic song in fine fiddle. Great outro guitar work from Mike Holmes. One of the best songs in IQ's catalog? Possibly. This is just a great album. It sits at number 4. It could be higher. No bad tracks on here. Great album, Dark Matter. That is my number 4.
Well, guess what my number 3 is? Dark Matter. Dark Matter. This is when I saw IQ. And it was after Paul Cook decided to retire before he changed his mind and decided to unretire. But it was the first performance. It was the Near Fest in 2005 was their first performance with Andy Edwards. And he was active on, I don't even remember what social media it would have been that back then. Maybe MySpace. But there was some chatter about fans telling him that he better get the snare sound right. And so when I met him in the VIP line, I said, Andy, I think you nailed the snare sound. And he immediately started talking to me about gear. And I was just like, oh my God, he thinks I'm a drummer, which I'm not. And so I had to change the subject because he went on to explain how he studied Paul Cook's snare sound and how he replicated it. But that was a great experience. But this album, Sacred Sound, a fantastic opener, almost as good as The Darkest Hour. Red Dust Shadow, beautiful song about war, gorgeous, one of my favorites. It has a Mellotron solo. How could I not love that? You Never Will is super cool. Born Brilliant, I will always remember from its presentation at the show. Anybody who's seen any footage of IQ or has seen IQ knows that they have always had three screens, which is very much like what Genesis did when they presented the Lamb Lies Down at Broadway. They always have three screens above them. And when they did Born Brilliant, it was this one part of like one letter in a word. And that was all you could see. And the rest of it was just red. And as the song went on, it zoomed out so that you could see what the word was. And at the end of the Born Brilliant, when the astronaut says, "We came in peace for all mankind," that's what it says. And I'm getting chills just talking about it because I thought it was the coolest presentation, probably the coolest presentation on a video screen I've ever seen in my life. Because you're watching it and you're going, "What does it say? What does it say? I can't tell what it says." And then right when that happens, it's just like, oh, what? Talk about thinking about what your visual presentation is going to be. Just phenomenal. I've never forgotten it, and I have the DVD that was filmed there. That's called Stage. I don't know if you've ever seen that, but it
Yeah.
shows that, and it's very cool. And then Harvest of Souls. Harvest of Souls, very interesting about corruption and unethical business practices and unethical politics. And when they played it at Nearfest, Peter Nichols said, "This is not an anti-American song." And then they played it, but it kind of is. It's not about the US per se, but it really sort of is. I mean, they show the Enron logo in the video presentation, and so it really kind of is. But I mean, super deep. I mean, gosh, the basically says the children are all that's going to be left because everyone else is impure but them. I mean, it's pretty heavy stuff. But the most amazing thing about it is the guitar solo. And when I was saying before about how Mike Holmes keeps his little tricks until the very perfect moment, there's that one little bend where it goes, "Rrr," and it's just placed almost at the end of the solo, and it's so beautiful. And then there's a really long fade out during the solo. And I always get into disagreements with people who don't like fade outs because I'm like, one of the things, because they think it's a cop out, they always say, like, end the song, don't do a fade out. But the thing that's great about this fade out, and what I think is great about a lot of fade outs, is it leaves you going, "No, no, I'm not done listening to that. Don't fade out." And I think that kind of a tease is just great. I like to be messed with like that. It's just, and that's how I feel about the end of that song, as I think, "No, don't fade out." But alas, it has to end sometime. But Dark Matter is my number three.
All right. My number three is The Wake from 1985. This is an original pressing on the Sahara Records, which is sorry, to give you another look there, the Sahara label.
Nice.
Again, I think you'll find that Peter Nichols did the design for that label as well. But yeah, I mean, this was my introduction to the band. This and one other album that I haven't talked about yet were one of the two first albums that I heard from, shall we say, less than completely legal sources at around the sort of turn of the century. About 20 years ago, I think. Yeah. And I still really, this album connected with me pretty much instantly. Whereas the other one I'm going to talk about, which is actually higher in my list, didn't connect with me instantly. It took time. But I love this. It's, you've got the proggy stuff like Widow's Peak and Outer Limits and that sort of thing, and Headlong. But you've also got the Magic Roundabout, which has this real sort of 80s drum machine pattern to it, which I love. I'm a sucker for that sort of thing. I love the sound of it. The title track, even though it's less than 4 minutes long, kind of sums up IQ's 80s sound perfectly in a 4 minute song. You know, if somebody wanted to know what 80s IQ sounded like, I would just play them the song. And I think there you go. That perfectly sums them up. It's got Mike Holmes's guitar. It's got the really swelling keyboards of Martin Orford. It's got the vocals of Peter Nichols. It's got everything. So yeah, that's my number three. I think I don't know. I like this album, but yeah, I mean, Peter Nichols' vocals would definitely get more finessed and smooth out the rough edges and that sort of thing. But there's a certain charm to the way he sings on this album that I really, really like. So, and I think again, because it was my introduction to the band, even though it was like 20 years after the record came out that I heard it, it'll always hold a bit of a soft spot for me for that reason too. But yeah, that's my number three, The Wake.
Great choice. I have not mentioned it yet. My next choice, my number three from 1993, Ever. And this was when IQ took control of their own destiny. Never came out in America. It has the Made in England import sticker right there. The band was on the major label, Squawk, for 2 records. They were pushed in a commercial direction. They didn't have their old singer. They got back together with Peter Nichols for this one. This is the first one that Mike Holmes produced, and this is where Cookie's drum sound started to sound a lot better. Once Mike Holmes started producing the band, this is their best sounding album up to that point, I think. So they didn't have any people to answer to because they were putting it out on their own on Giant Electric P, their record label. So this is my number five, 50 minutes long. Pete is back, I have written down. The Darkest Hour, the 11-minute opener. IQ is back, baby. Fully in the prog zone with a cracker of an opening tune. The best sounding CD at the time, like I said. Their own label, with each instrument audible in the mix. You could even hear John Jowett's bass, and this is his first record with the band. And he acquits himself quite well, I wrote down, especially his fretless bass work on this record and all the IQ albums he was on. He's a monster player, very underrated, and a nice guy, like I said, too. Fading Senses, you get more fretless bass from Jowett. You have a mellow vocal. The first third of the song is mellow, and then the second half, is instrumental, and it's phenomenal. And I wrote down Cookie's drums have some thwack and pop, is exactly what I wrote down here. Out of nowhere, catchy and hook-laden prog with an odd time signature. Sort of a catchy and commercial. It harkens back to the 2 previous records, but it's got that great twist, that proggy twist where that's not 4/4. That's some odd time signature. It's prog, it's IQ, baby. Further Away, the 14.5-minute epic, the album's centerpiece. Widge's keyboard work, Martin Orford, is off the charts. I love his extended solo halfway through. Great song. Leap of Faith. The melodies in the song, the playing. This is a melodic masterpiece of a song. They all show off. I love it. I love the vocal section. I love the instrumental section. And then, like Todd said, Came Down is the LP closer. And I wrote, like a fine dessert after a delicious meal. You just sit back and it washes over you. And it's a great way to end the record. This is a phenomenal album. Ever, highly recommended. My number 3 IQ album.
Came Down is another great fade out. I wouldn't want that song to end any other way. Okay, so my number two. My number two is Resistance. I basically, how I feel about IQ, with very few exceptions, I basically think that every album is a little better than the one before it. And if you look at my order, it's jumbled up a little bit, but I like this band a little bit more with each album. And now this is one place where it is jumbled up because this is their most recent album and it's my number two. So that tells you one thing. But one thing about this album, and you guys have mentioned The Road of Bones, is what I do with this album is it was easier with The Road of Bones because they actually said disc two of the two CD set are extra. They're not part of the album. They actually said the words. Those are not part of the album. So for me, I split that album in two. I also split this album in two. When this came out, Mike Holmes said, we tried to make the songs on CD2 better than the songs on CD2 from our previous album. But I still, for me, this album ends For Another Lifetime. To me, that's the album closer. And the rest of the songs are gravy. That's just what I do to it in my head because I agree it's too long. But that's how I get around it, is that I really feel like From a Missile to For Another Lifetime is the meat of the album, and I think that's the statement. And I think The Great Spirit Way, Fire and Security, Perfect Space, and Fallout are the extra. They did say that that's the case for this album, but Mike Holmes said, we tried to make the second disc in the two CD set as good as the first disc. And I don't think they did. But the reason why I love this album and why it's higher on my list than where most people put it is that it's the melodies speak to me. I think it's their most beautiful album. I think Rise, Stay Down, and Shallow Bay, and If Anything are all, some people might say they're kind of downers, but I think they're all just breathtakingly beautiful. I just think that they're gorgeous, and that appeals to me. I also think For Another Lifetime is a career defining highlight for them. I think there's a song on an album that I haven't mentioned yet that I think is their best song, but I think For Another Lifetime is right up there with it. And just when you talk, I was talking earlier about how I had issues with some of the Paul Manel era lyrics, and I think that Peter Nichols has refined his lyric writing to the point where it's very economical and brief, and he might say, just one thing, and then for another lifetime, where he says for another lifetime, and there's that little instrumental part and the guitar solo kicks in, I always cry. I think it's absolutely gorgeous. And then he says it again, and he adds the word forevermore, and I just think it's so pretty. And that's one of the reasons why, for me, that's where the album ends, and the rest of it is bonus tracks. Really good bonus tracks. But the end, the last 10 seconds of Perfect Space just totally kicks ass. It sounds like the apocalypse or something. I mean, it's just the sound of Neil Durant's Mellotron is just, it's like Mellotron cranked through some kind of terrifying machine that makes it sound scarier. And I just absolutely love that. That's why I like their last two albums best, because I think that there is a metal kind of aspect that they put in them. They're heavier and they're darker and they're kind of scary, but also very beautiful. And so that's why I landed on Resistance as my number two. And holy cow, look at that album cover.
Mm.
Gorgeous. And the band photo, just beautiful. Just, I love it. Number two.
Packaging.
Wow. I definitely need to spend more time with that record
Me too.
because it just hasn't
So
quite,
do I.
I don't know, it hasn't quite sunk its hooks into me. So that's a me problem. I admit that. My number two is going to be a lot of people's number one, I think, and that is Todd, can you hold up your Subterranea? Because
Yes.
that's the regular cover that most people know. This is my number
Yes.
two. This is the one you get on vinyl. You get it on
Oh,
like a little tiny
the one I don't have.
picture. Yeah. Um, they will reissue it, Todd. Don't worry.
They
I'm sure
will.
they'll get
I
around
know.
to it. This is very much IQ's Lamb Lies Down on Broadway. And I'm going to be controversial here in as much as saying I like this album better than The Lamb. And that's
I
a
do
big
too.
call.
I do
But
too.
I think it's more consistent musically. I like the story better. It's still confusing, the story, but it's less confusing, I think, than The Lamb. But I mean, so many great tracks. The overture is wonderful. The title track is a great sort of first proper song. Provider is kind of like you get the overture is like an introduction musically, and then Provider is like an introduction lyrically, and then Subterranea is kind of where it really kicks off, and starts telling the story properly. Sleepless Incidental and Failsafe are wonderful. Speak My Name is gorgeous. Um, Infernal Chorus, King of Fools, and then it starts side three, the second disc of the CD starts off with Laid Low, which just kicks your butt and just makes you, if you'd kind of, thought that you were getting a little bit mystical at the end of side two, at the end of disc one on the CD. Laid Low just wakes you straight back up again and says, "Hey, we've still got a long way to go, guys." Um, Somewhere in Time is great. The Narrow Margin. I have read a lot of people say that is kind of like it's the epic on the album, and I've read a lot of people say that that's like the low light on the album, and I don't
Oh
get that
no.
at all.
No.
I think it's one of their very best epics.
Yeah.
Um,
I've heard that
and
too,
it's
and I
just
disagree.
and it's just a great way to close out the album. So, you know, not just a concept album, pretty much a rock opera, this one. But it's just an incredible album. As I say, it's going to be a lot of people's number one. But yeah, Subterranea from 1997, my number two. And yeah, it was really hard not to put it at number one, but my number one always had to be my number one. So
And I have a friend who shall remain nameless, part of my prog rock posse, who only likes The Narrow Margin from that record. That's the only song he likes on the whole record. And I think it's a great
that's
record.
crazy.
I agree.
Opinions are all over the map on that one,
Yeah.
I guess.
But my number two, to continue what Mr. Bicyclelegs is saying, Subterranea is my number two. And at the point this record came out, I wrote down it's the best sounding album they've released so far. From late 97, 1 hour, 42 minutes on Giant Electric P, again, their own label, produced by Mike Holmes. And I wrote down 23 years after Genesis released The Lamb Lies Down on Broadway, IQ released Subterranea. This is quite possibly their apex. It's got the great lineup: Nichols, Holmes, Orford, Jowett, and Cook. Highlights for me here, so I don't go on forever. The overture, Sleepless Incidental, is amazing. And then they do it one better with Failsafe. When that lift comes in and Nichols starts singing I Don't Belong Here till the end, that part is amazing.
Yeah.
I don't be, that part gives me goosebumps. That is one of my favorite IQ songs. Failsafe, I just crank it and I scream along like a maniac. I love that song. The ending of the first CD with the guitar and the keyboard mixing together is great. And that is called, what is it? State of Mind is really good. And then you said disc two kicks off in fine style. Breathtaker, the second track. Capricorn, even though it has a little bit of saxophone on it, I don't mind it. And I'm usually not a big horn person, except maybe Chicago and Billy Joel. I think it fits in Blood, Sweat, and Tears. But I don't like it when Marillion uses the sax. But here it's okay because it's a very mournful song, and the saxophone conveys that message. Somewhere in Time is great. The Narrow Margin, the 20-minute song that ends the album, their longest song since their debut at this time, record number 6. So my number 2, Subterranea, just a phenomenal album. And like you guys, I wasn't going to say it because I thought I would get in trouble. I like this better than The Lamb. I think there's less filler. And this is
Yeah,
a moody beast of an album, but it's friggin' great. So
and it's
that is my
much
number 2.
yeah, much easier to pick songs out of it. You can pick songs out of it and play it for people who don't like prog, and it doesn't sound like you're playing them something that's too challenging. The saxophone, if you don't like it, there are 17 other songs that that don't have it.
But
So
it's okay here. It's okay.
yeah,
So
yeah. When I was listening, I spent part of the day yesterday and part of the day today getting all the way through Subterranean, and I was like, I can't believe it's number 4.
it's that
That's
good.
how I feel about it. It's just it's very, very good. Very good. Okay. So we're at number 1. My number 1, I guess if you do the math, is The Road of Bones. Man, talk about an album that speaks to you. Now, this album was available as a single disc, 5 songs from the outside in until the end. So that makes it actually, even though I had the deluxe version that has a second disc, that makes it easy for me to say, okay, well, the album is the first 5 songs, and then everything else. And in this album, it kind of makes sense because the rest of the songs are kind of fun. I mean, some of them are sort of dark, but they do really seem like bonuses. Interesting things about this album when they asked when John Jowett decided to leave and they asked Tim Isu, please, somebody in the comments, if we're saying that wrong, spell it out phonetically because I've always called him Tim Isu, but I'm not sure if that's right. But anyway, they called him and offered him the gig, and he was blown away because he left IQ in solidarity with Paul Manel. He was very upset that they let Peter Nichols come back and that they fired Paul Manel. And so he thought that they would never speak to him again. And they didn't talk for many, many years. And they called him and asked him to do it. And his reaction was like, really? Me? You want me to come back? And he was really just blown away by it. I think that's a really sweet story. And Neil Durant, since he makes his debut here, Neil Durant used to be, he was in another band, and I should have wrote this down. I can't remember the name of the band that he was in. But back in the 90s, before there was MySpace, before there was Facebook, there used to be, I mean, there used to be news groups, but sort of after news groups, there were email digests. And you could get in an email digest and you could either get all of these separate messages in your email, or you could do like they would do like a daily thing where they would put all of the messages on this message board into one email like at the end of the day. There was one for Genesis called Paper Late and that I was on, and there was one for IQ and it was called It All Posts Here, which is a kind of a play on words with their song, their early song, It All Stops Here. And Neil Durant was the guy who was in charge of that. He was a friend of the band, and he was the guy that ran It All Posts Here. And so when they announced that he was going to be their keyboardist, I was like, where do I know him from? And one time he defended me because somebody flamed me because I said I liked Phil Collins era Genesis. And Neil Durant wrote this really long thing about how everybody should be nicer to me because we all have different opinions, blah, 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 blah. So I have a very personal reason to think that Neil Durant's a cool guy. But anyway, so this album starts with From the Outside In, which is a pretty, if I was going to think of a something negative to say about the last 2 IQ albums, they sort of start kind of similarly with the same kind of song at the beginning. But The Road of Bones is one of the most beautiful things I've ever heard. That melody, that little marimba melody in that song is so good. And every time, I mean, you hear a lot of songs that are great, and every time you hear them, you think, oh, that melody is really great. But this one, I actually have to pause and say to myself, Holy cow, that's a great melody. I mean, it's just so good.
Mm,
And the way it fits into that composition is so great, especially when about three-quarters into it, the song gets really, really, really intense. And Peter's vocals are just astonishing during that song, during the title track. Without Walls, if I could think of a way to describe it, I would say terrifying. I think that those Mellotron sounds and the way that they're in there and then they're backwards and it's the one time where I actually heard something and I was like, this scares me. Not in a way like black metal does or anything like that, but in a way where I was just like, okay, when I first heard it, I was like, okay, I'm actually creeped out by this. And I love that. Um, Ocean is beautiful. That when I heard that melody in Ocean the first time, I just couldn't believe it was real. I was just like, I can't believe how beautiful this song is. And I think Davey and Bicyclelegs, I think both of you talked about this album without talking about in the end, until the end. Um, I don't know if anybody mentioned it, if anybody name checked until the end. Bicyclelegs, you might have.
mm.
But I think that this is the best IQ song. I think that it is the most beautiful. I think that even my wife, who gets subjected to a lot of really complicated music because she has to live in the same house. Even my wife, when this album came out and I was playing until the end, and it got to that lyric, uh scrape across the night sky, and she actually said, your words scrape across the night sky, that's really beautiful. And I was like, you know what, it really is. And so every time I hear that, I think of Samantha and how she was right. It really is those are beautiful words. And that part before the intense part until the end where everything stops and there's silence and there's this little computer modem sound that kind of goes and then the proggy part starts. It's so cool. I can't get enough of it. And the last thing I want to say about it, I know I've already gone on too long about it, is that before I found out that this was about a serial killer, I made my own story up. And then I found out like 2 years later that somebody confirmed that yes, it's about a serial killer. And I prefer my own story. And this is my story. And even though there's a picture of him with a shovel there in the graveyard, my story is that it's somebody who loses his partner and he's so distraught about it that he does all of these things and he kind of loses his mind. And one of the things that he does is he goes to the graveyard and tries to dig up her body. And then at the end, she says, I'll sit with you in front of the fire one last time, and then you have to let me go. And I like that better. So that's the story in my head when I listen to the Road of Bones, even though I know it's wrong. As far as the serial killer part, I don't want to know the details because I like my story.
No,
But I often interpret things, especially in prog rock, incorrectly. So, but that's my
that
number
might be
one.
that might be the first time I've heard somebody have their own head canon about an album.
I'm sticking
But
to
yeah. Now, a couple of things I'll quickly say before I get to my number one is firstly, I always thought his name was Tim Esau because I think of it like I thought of it like the character from the Bible, Esau and Jacob.
That is probably
So
correct.
I that's how I've always thought it was
I didn't
pronounced.
think of it
But
that way, but that is probably correct.
and secondly, I love the fact, gentlemen, that we all have different number one albums.
Yeah, me too.
So my number one album, Dark Matter from 2004. This is the other album that I downloaded. And when I first listened to it, I could not wrap my head around it. I was like, what on earth is this? Especially Sacred Sound. Like, it was just so, like, I listened to a lot of prog before this. Don't get me wrong. I've been listening to prog music since 1985. First prog album I ever heard was Brain Salad Surgery, which is a pretty complex album. And yet, when I first listened to this and heard Sacred Sound, it was a bit too much for me. but I persisted with it. And eventually I grew to love this album to the point where, and again, big calls. This is probably a top 10 all-time album for me.
Nice.
And Sacred Sound is my favorite IQ song. It's
A
just an
fine
incredible
choice.
song. Um, really complex, different, like it changes time signature about 3 times. Um, you know, it has this really, dramatic verses and choruses, and then it gets into this middle section, which is dark and eerie and slow. And then it comes again, that, that almost that heroes theme that Davey keeps bringing up. You get that sort of, you know, redemption thing, and they gallop off into the sunset, and Red Dust Shadow, just great song to follow up Sacred Sound. It's again, it's a slower song, it's a more atmospheric song, it's, melodramatic, it's wonderful. You Never Will is great. Probably my least favorite song on the album, but still a brilliant, brilliant song. As is Born brilliant, which is a great way to sort of close out the first half of the album. Uh, but then Harvest of Souls, my goodness. The quintessential IQ epic. Does it tilt its hat towards Supper's Ready? Absolutely. But they definitely do it very much in their own way. They're not copying Supper's Ready as much as they're using it as a template to do their own thing. And they do their own thing wonderfully. The lyric is just absolutely brilliant. I don't think it's anti-America, Todd, as much as it is anti sort of corporate America
Yeah,
and
yeah.
anti-capitalism.
I think that's what Peter was trying to say at the show. Yeah.
Yeah. So, and it's very much sort of anti the corporatization of music and that sort of thing, and how people become slaves to it, even though they don't want to, you know. So, I mean, and it just, that guitar solo at the end, to me, that is the quintessential Michael Holmes guitar solo. The tone on that is just, it's
Yeah,
sumptuous.
that's the
It's just
best one.
absolutely. This album, even though this is a dark album, even though it's a complex album, even though there's not any light spaces on this album, this is an album I can pick out and listen to when I'm feeling really bad, when depression is kicking in and that sort of thing. I can put this album on and it soothes me. And I don't know why that is, because as I say, it's not a bright, breezy album by any stretch. I mean, look at that cover. You know, this is not a Barrel of Laughs album. It's deep and it's complex and it's dark. But for some reason, this album can soothe my soul when my soul really needs soothing. And so for that reason, it holds a very, very special place in my heart. And it always had to be my number one in the IQ ranking. So there you have it. Dark Matter from 2004.
Yeah, I think
Excellent.
I know what you mean though by that. There's some joy in it, even though it's really sad. I mean, the end of Red Dust Shadow is tears I've tried so hard to hide, always break inside. Take these things and fold your wings. Words can't bring you back. I mean, there's stuff like that all over this record, but for some reason, I don't feel bad when I listen to it. So
Mm,
I think you're really onto something there.
thank you.
But I always think that m melancholy music makes me feel better. So
Yeah.
There is some truth in that. And my number one, I have two different copies of The Wake from 1985, and I even have the CD
oh, I wish I had that.
set
Oh, yeah, I've got that too. Yeah.
with that great artwork from Peter Nichols. And the middle character that everyone thinks is him is actually Ray Dawn Chong, Chong's daughter from Cheech and Chong. That's her character from that movie she did. And it's like a caveman type of movie. The name escapes me; it just flew out of my head.
When I didn't know anything about IQ, and when I first saw that, I thought it was Peter Gabriel. And I was like, why is Peter Gabriel's picture on it? Because it looks like plays live, you know?
Mm.
It is reminiscent of that. You're right. This record came out June 85, 49 minutes long. Initially, it came out on the Sahara label. Another label maybe they made up, like you guys were saying. This one is produced by Mike and Tim. The Outer Limits, the way it starts off, the bass and drums, those haunting keyboards. Excellent song, 8-minute track or so. I think it's almost 9 minutes. The Wake is a good, short, punchy rock song. Widow's Peak, I wrote down exquisite mini epic. And let's see, 1,000 Days, a catchy short song, should have been a single, and it wasn't. This, by the way, was the only IQ album that ever charted on the British charts 1 week at number 72. Out of all their records, the only one that ever charted in their home country. Very weird. Bonus track. I'm not even going to try to pronounce it in French, but the translation I found, and I spoke to my cousin who speaks a little French, in the park of the Black Castle, dans le parc de Chateau Noir, I think is the closest way to say it. That's a pretty cool track. Headlong, going back to the previous song, the last song on the initial album, Headlong, 7.5-minute mini epic. And when the part where Nichols sings "Marry Me Forever," cried the bride, and just the way Orford's synth comes in, one of the highlights of the IQ catalog for me.
And then followed by that guitar solo. I'm getting all misty thinking about it.
There's that section of the song, and Headlong is a top tier tune for me from IQ. This whole record is great. Nichols, Holmes, Orford, Tim Esau, sorry, and Paul Cook. This is my favorite IQ album, probably I think the third one I ever heard, but IQ The Wake is my number one. And like you said, Bicyclelegs, we all had different choices because that's how great the catalog is. No one's ever going to pick the same order.
And everybody's right.
Yeah.
That's what's so great about a band like this is when all the albums are good, you can rank them and everybody can be right. No one's wrong.
No bad albums. Now, before we say goodbye, I just want to ask these guys each what they have coming up. Todd, would you like to say? By the way, this should hopefully air this coming weekend. Just to let you know, hopefully by Sunday we'll have this up.
I think Peter Peter Kerr from Rock Daydream Nation just released a show that we did about Led Zeppelin's album Presence, which was challenging for me because he actually said to me, "Let's do something that's outside of your comfort zone," and that's what we came up with. And I had a great time doing it, and I learned a lot. And that's the main thing that I can think of. My schedule has sort of quieted down a bit, but let's see, what else do I have? No, I think that's pretty much it.
Okay, Bicyclelegs, what do you have coming up on the great Bicyclelegs YouTube channel? One
Okay,
word,
well,
by the way.
Thank you. My most recent video was with Mike Lodano from Grab a Stack of Rock, where we picked our favorite song from each of the first 8 Marillion albums, so the EMI years. We're going to be doing a part 2 of that in January. I'm not sure what my video is going to be this week, or even if I'm going to be doing one, because I'm doing a bunch of shows for other people this week. I'm doing this one. I'm doing one with Peter Kerr on Rock Daydream Nation, and I'm going to be doing a show with Tom Curlis on Curlis Mania. So look out for those. But generally speaking, I have a video out every Saturday morning US time. So, you know, just subscribe to Bicyclelegs if I can put that shameless plug in there, and follow it, and you'll see I cover a lot of different music. So, you know, there'll be some stuff you like and some stuff maybe doesn't interest you so much. So
it's a really good channel. Everyone should check it out. I'm going to put a link down below in the video. And speaking of that, why don't you tell us your favorite IQ albums? You can name all 11. You can name 3 or 4 or 5, whatever, in the comments below. And what do you think of our rankings? And these gentlemen will both be back on Cretan Classics in the future. We're mulling over and talking over our next show for next year. Maybe we'll do top 12 IQ tunes. Maybe we'll do another band that we were talking about. We'll keep it secret for now, but they will both be back on the channel. And Bicyclelegs hopefully will be back before Christmas to do a top 12 tune show with me on a different band. But we're going to keep that under wraps, as Jethro Tull would say. There's an obscure reference. Indeed, indubitably. So I want everyone to rock out, prog on, and pogo. Like, subscribe, and comment below. Thank you, Todd Evans, for joining me. Thank you, Bicyclelegs, for joining me. And we'll see everyone in the near future. Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.